Have you received a statutory demand and are you wondering how to deal with it? Don't worry, you're not alone. I'm going to talk you through how to get a statutory demand set aside. Firstly, a statutory demand is a formal demand for debt served on you by a creditor. Most creditors must send you a statutory demand before trying to make you bankrupt. The demand should contain certain information such as your details and those of a creditor and information about the debt creditor is claiming. You have 18 or 21 days to reply to the statutory demand, depending on what you want to do. If you don't deal with a statutory demand within 21 days of it being served, the creditor will take this as proof that you're unable to pay the debt and then try and make you bankrupt. There's no minimum amount that you must owe before a creditor can serve a statutory demand. However, if a creditor serves a statutory demand for a debt less than £5,000, they can only apply to make you bankrupt if they apply jointly with one or more creditors and you owe at least £5,000 in total across all the creditors that jointly apply to make you bankrupt. The 18 or 21 days start from the day the demand was served on you. When a document is served, it means that it's been delivered in the correct way. The creditor should try to serve a statutory demand on you personally. If this is not possible, the demand may be sent to you by first-class post or putting it through your letterbox. In certain limited situations, the demand may be advertised in a newspaper. If the demand is advertised in a newspaper, the date of service is usually classed as the date that it appears on the advert. If it's posted to you, the date of service is usually 2 business days after the date of posting. Business days don't include weekends and bank holidays. If you agree that you owe the money, try to negotiate with the creditor. Bankruptcy can impact your job and home. Some creditors use statutory demands as a cheap tool to persuade you to pay your debts. They may never have had intention of actually making you bankrupt. If you receive a statutory demand, get in touch with the creditor or solicitor that sent it as soon as you possibly can. Try and negotiate with them within the 21-day limit and using one of the following options. You could offer to pay in instalments. These should be based on what you can realistically afford. Remember, the creditor does not have to accept your offer. Complete your budget to work out what you can afford to pay. Look at refinancing. This means taking out a loan that you can afford to pay this and possibly other debts. Seek independent financial advice if you're thinking about doing this. Offer a voluntary charge against your property. Now, this would mean that the debt is then secured, a bit like a secured loan or mortgage. You could offer this with conditions attached, such as the creditor can't sell the property, so that they only get their money when you decide to sell the house yourself. You could also ask that the interest on the debt's frozen. Get a personal guarantee for the debt from another person, like a friend or a relative. But what are the grounds for setting aside a statutory demand? There are a few grounds that could mean that your demand gets set aside. The first ground is when you have a claim against the creditor, which is equal to or more than the debt. The second ground is when the debt is secured against property, that it's worth the same or more than the debt. However, the creditor doesn't have to accept an offer to secure the debt. The third ground is when the whole debt or unsecured part of the debt is below £5,000. But if the creditor intends to apply jointly with one or more of the other creditors to make you bankrupt, then an application on this ground could fail. The fourth ground is when the debt is disputed and the court believes that there are reasonable grounds for dispute. This might include where the creditor's waited too long to pursue the debt, or the debt's regulated by the Consumer Credit Act 1974 and there's no signed agreement. The fifth ground is when the court is satisfied on some other grounds that the demand ought to be set aside. This could include when the debt is subject to a court judgment with instalments and that you've kept up with the payments under that instalment order. It's up to the court whether to accept your application if you use this ground. You might be wondering what happens if there are mistakes on the form. Unfortunately, the courts are unlikely to set aside a statutory demand just because there's a mistake on the form. So, for example, if the amount claimed is slightly wrong. If court action has already been taken, then you won't usually be able to set aside the statutory demand on the grounds that you dispute the debt. This is because a court judgment will be taken as proof that you owe the debt. However, if you have put in a defence to the claim, then the creditor will need to show the court a good reason why they've gone ahead and issued a statutory demand on a debt that they know that you've disputed. If you have a court judgment and are keeping up with instalments, this may be a ground for getting the statutory demand set aside. So, make sure that you keep up with payments on a court judgment. So what actions do you need to take if you want to dispute the statutory demand? Well, if you can't come to an agreement with a creditor or there's a dispute, you can apply to the court to set aside the statutory demand. The 21-day time limit for dealing with the demand stops until the court has decided whether to grant the application. The statutory demand should tell you how and where you should apply to set it aside. If the creditor that has sent you the statutory demand is a government department and the statutory demand says that the petition will be presented in the High Court, then you should apply to the High Court. To set aside the demand, you must do the following within 18 days of it being served. You need to apply using form IAA. You can fill in the form online and print it off, date, sign and send it to court. You'll also need to complete a witness statement in support of your application. You can find a sample witness statement on the Justice website. You'll also need to provide 3 copies of each form to the court when you apply. If you've missed the 18-day time limit, you may still be able to apply to set aside the statutory demand if you can give some good reasons for your delay and the creditor has not yet petitioned for your bankruptcy. When applying to set aside a statutory demand, you should give your own details so the court can identify you. Explain that you're asking for a statutory demand to be set aside and state which grounds you're using. You should also give the date of the statutory demand and the date you became aware of the demand, including a copy of it and any other evidence that you're relying on, and then sign and date your application. The court may dismiss the application without a hearing if you've not shown that there's a good reason for your application or if you've not included all of the information that's required. Otherwise, the court will set a date, time and place for a hearing. They will give you and the creditor at least 5 business days' notice of this hearing. If it isn't just a statutory demand and you found yourself struggling with debt, you may want to look into debt solutions. Some of them lower your monthly repayments and others can even write off some of your debts. It all depends on your unique financial situation and what you qualify for. Under this video, I've linked to a form which is on my new website and it'll ask you like a few multiple choice questions like how much money do you owe and how many people do you owe? And then at the end of the form, it'll connect you to a company who I've partnered with to give you all the information you need about debt solutions available in the UK. So click the link below the video, go and check it out and let me know how you get on.